Shabbat Shalom. So as I said in introducing the Torah reading, the third Aliyah, right, very long, right? And the reason that it is that long is because this rebuke is read quickly, and the luach, the little yellow loose book that I have, and I think I saw Mike with a copy of it too. It instructs you because sometimes you have to give more than 7 aliyahs, right? There's 2 weddings coming up, or somebody needs to bench Gomer up because they were sick and they got, or whatever it is. And so you can split aliyahs into smaller ones to allow you to call more people, right? But the law says, do not do this with the tochacha. Do not split it up into multiple aliyot. And most of us don't know or pay attention to this thing, but there's a hierarchy of aliyahs, right? There's a hierarchy of aliyahs, and what's the best aliyah? Third, shlishi. Kohen and Levi don't count, right? Because you have to give the Kohen to a Kohen, and the Levi to a Levi, and the Kohen could be a shnuk, and the Levi a ganef, but they still get Kohen and Levi, right? But shlishi, you give, that's a big honor, right? And I've seen people get mad. I don't know, frankly, the whole hierarchy, but I've seen people like get really angry and quit the shul because they were given shishi, right, or something. I don't know, but the tochacha is the third aliyah, right? And even in the triennial that we read this morning, it's still the third aliyah. And maybe that's to make up for the fact that it's also like very negative and nobody wants it, okay? Nobody wants it. And so if the rabbi is not a Kohen or a Levi, the rabbi gets it, right? The rabbi gets it. And, because it's like simultaneously undesirable and prestigious, right? So I'm thinking that they probably, actually, I guess it's like being the shul president, right? Both undesirable and prestigious. I wonder, if they really, because no matter how fundamentalist you may be, nobody thinks that God gave the aliyah divisions, right? Nobody thinks that, right? So maybe when the sages were divvying up the aliyahs, they said, "We'll make this shlishi to sort of compensate for the fact that otherwise nobody wants," right? But these passages are very difficult. Theologically or philosophically, they're very, very difficult, right? Why are they necessary? Why does God need to threaten us in order for us to behave as we ought to, right? That to me is like the first problem with these verses, right? We should do what's right and not have to be threatened in order to get us to do what's right. Second of all, I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem to me that the world always works the way that this Parsha seems to say it could, right? Good is not always rewarded, and evil is not always punished, right? It's just not, right? We see it all the time, right? Bad people do bad things, and they do it brazenly, and nothing happens to them. Although maybe sometimes it does, right? But, the world doesn't work that way, right? We know wonderful people who have very short lives, right? We know wonderful people who have very horrible lives, right? And bad people who seem to have everything they want, right? And so anthropologists tell us that the idea of the afterlife developed in response to the observed unfairness of life, right? If you look, in the Torah, there's no afterlife. In the Torah, there is no afterlife, right? But by the time you get to the prophetic books, there is an afterlife, right? Why? Because people say, that's just sort of natural. Well, yeah. Things don't always go the way they ought to, but God will fix it in the afterlife. God will fix it in the afterlife, right? But theodicy, right? Theodicy means trying to justify or understand the ways of God, right? And that's one of the reasons that people lose their religion, right? We have this idea of an all-powerful and loving God, right? And then doesn't seem to work that way. For example, I had a relative in Jerusalem, like from way back, right? You had the relatives, all right? Well, how were we related? I don't know, they're relatives, right? And I think that she was a cousin of my grandfather, but I'm not sure because I never knew my grandfather, right? But anyway, she lived in Jerusalem and she lived there for a long time, but she didn't actually speak much Hebrew, right? Which made conversation difficult because she spoke a lot of languages. She spoke Yiddish, which I don't speak, German, which I don't speak, Polish, which I don't speak, Russian, which I don't speak, and French, because after the war they moved to France. Another in the long list of languages that I do not speak, right? But she spoke a little Hebrew, right? And one day she said to me in her kind of broken Hebrew, "Ksheha'iti b'machane amarti ein Elohim." Right? Jacob, what does that mean?
When I was in the camp, I said there wasn't a God.
Right. When I was in the camp, meaning the concentration camp, right? I said there is no God. Right? Shehayiti b'machane amarti ein Elohim. How do you argue? Right? How do you argue? Right? But Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who's an Orthodox rabbi, but understands, right, that the world doesn't work the way, and some other Orthodox rabbis will try to explain, well, yeah, you don't really understand, but, everything God does is good, but you don't understand it, and blah, 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 blah. Greenberg doesn't buy that, but he says that God's relationship to humanity is like a parent's relationship to a child, right? As a child gets older, the parent needs to withdraw a bit and allow the child to grow and mature, right? When the child is younger, you have to threaten them with punishment to get them to behave, right? Because go reason with a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, right? You can't. So you just say, well, if you don't clean up your room, no dessert, no ice cream, or whatever it may be, right? But if you say that, to a 15, 16-year-old, right, if you don't clean up your room, no ice cream, you're just gonna laugh at it, right? So, as the child gets older, punishment is neither effective nor necessary, right? So what Yitz Greenberg says is actually 3,000 years ago, the world really did work that way. But it doesn't work that way anymore, and that's a conscious decision by God to give humanity more independence. Okay, but Rabbi Eddie Feld, in his commentary on the new Machzor that we don't yet have because we can't afford it, right? But in his commentary, he points out that the biblical doctrine is actually corporate, it's not personal, right? God does not actually say, if you as an individual do good, things will go well with you as an individual. It's talking to the people as a whole, not to the individual, right? And my teacher and mentor, Father Jim Walsh, would always say in his classes, there is no doctrine of reward and punishment in the Bible, right? And everybody and most of my classmates who had, gone to 12 years of Catholic school and were now in a Catholic university would say, what? And he'd say, no, there's no reward and punishment. There's consequences, okay? And, but as I think about it, I'm not sure that that distinction is all that significant, right? But, we do see this work all the time, right? For example, most historians will tell you that the Nazis, may their memory be erased, would have won World War II if they had said, first we'll win the war, then we'll kill the Jews, right? But they were so hell-bent on killing the Jews that they directed resources from the front to devote to killing the Jews, right? If they had simply said, we'll win the war, then we'll kill the Jews, they would have won the war. And they did kill a lot of Jews, but they would have killed a lot more, right? And I never would have had that conversation with my cousin Menucha because she wouldn't have survived, right? And, why did the Soviet Union fall, right? Because a system that is based on continual oppression of other people won't last forever, right? It just won't. So, and I believe that that's not by accident, right? God designed the world so that it would work that there would be consequences for evil behavior, and good would always triumph, and good will always triumph, but often not as quickly as we would like, right? So we have to have a more sophisticated view of the text and not, dismiss it as nonsense, but also not take it excessively literally as if it's a recipe, or you put the money in the machine and the stack comes out or whatever, right? And if you pay attention, right, so we have this long aliyah with all of the curses or the consequences or whatever, but it ends with hope, right? And the Haftarah ends with hope. God promises that after our exile is over, he will remember his covenant with our ancestors, and he'll remember the land, right? And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says in many of his books and in many of his Divrei Torah that the Torah introduced the concept of hope into the world, right? That history has a purpose and that it's moving in a certain direction, right? Prior to the Torah, time was seen not as linear, but cyclical, right? And it's seen that way by Asian cultures to this day, right? If you look at the Buddhist concept of nirvana, right? That is not the same thing as Mashiach, right? It's not, because time is a circle, right? Time is a circle, and the same thing happens over and over and over again. And if you are not righteous in this life, you get reborn and you try again. And if you're really, really bad, you get reborn as a cockroach, you know, and if you're a poor man who does good in this world, you get reborn as a Brahmin or whatever, right? But what is nirvana? You get off the wheel, right? You get off the wheel. There's no purpose to time. There's no destination to time other than avoiding pain, right? And how do we avoid pain? We avoid detachment, right? I said, I don't even remember what the context was, but I said a couple of weeks ago, right, that pain and heartache is the price that we pay for love, right? And if you never love anything, you'll never have any heart, right? I mean, like even on the simple level, right? When you get a pet, right, you know that chances are you are going to outlive that pet, and you're going to be heartbroken, right? How do you prevent that? Don't have a pet, right? Is the love that you get from the pet worth the heartbreak that's inevitable? Most of us who are pet owners say it is, right? We wish it were otherwise, but we know that it's not, right? So the Torah introduced the idea that history is moving towards a better future, right? And Rabbi Sachs calls this the chronological imagination, right? That existence is not static, right? And I don't want to go too deep into this, right? But Professor Michael Walzer from Princeton says that there are two ways of kind of viewing the world, right? There's messianism and there's Exodus thinking, okay? Why Exodus thinking, right? Because we left Egypt and we headed to the promised land, right? But it took a long time, right? Whereas messianism, right, it's supernatural and it happens quick, right? Mashiach will come and everything will be better right away, right? But the Torah is really not messianist in that sense, right? It is gradualistic, right? And I mean, this is kind of like a basic disposition, right? If things are bad, but they're getting better, that's good, right? And if things are bad, but they're getting worse, that's not good, right? And that's, we live in this reality, right? That things are always going to be bad, but they can get a little bit better, right? That things can change for the better. And this is, one of the messages of this parasha, that evil may surround us, but ultimately evil will be defeated, but it can take a long time. Shabbat Shalom. Yeah, Brian.
Good question. So we don't split the third aliyah, but correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it says in the law that you can have multiple readers for that particular aliyah.
It does.
Up there when the aliyah is called. Why would we be able to split it among readers, but not split it among?
Because that, all right, everybody, I'll repeat the question if you didn't hear it, right, Brian? See, this is the problem, right? The luach really should be secret only for rabbis, right? Now you, right, but, right, the luach says you cannot split the third aliyah into multiple aliyahs, but you can have multiple readers, right? Why is that okay? Doesn't that also lengthen it? It doesn't, I mean, it might lengthen it minusculely, right? But if you split it up into several aliyahs, right, you have the blessing before and the blessing after multiple times, right? And you have a mishaberach after the aliyah multiple times, right? But if you switch readers in the middle, right, there's still the one, set of blessing before and after, right? So the law does say, right, because you may have a congregation where nobody's capable of reading 27 verses, right? But all of the readers have to be up there at the beginning and stay there, and you just sort of switch off. It's like the difference between switching players in hockey versus switching players in basketball, right? Right? You don't have to wait for a timeout in hockey. You just switch players. So you're allowed to do that. I don't think it would lengthen it very, very long. All right. Very good. So we continue with the Kaddish before Musaf and Musaf service, 155 or 428. And then continuing to the Amidah itself, we'll say the first two pages together.